Mile High Hoops podcast. It is the offseason. We are not going to see basketball again in Denver until October.
Sad.
Very sad. He's Aniello Piro. I'm Jake Shapiro, and there are so many questions about this Nuggets team this offseason. One, Zach By, the former podcast host of this podcast right here, has said this is the biggest offseason in Denver Nuggets history. I don't know if I completely agree with that, but I understand why. It's because you have to hire a new executive, you have to hire a new coach, you have big questions about the roster, including two major decisions about extensions, and your greatest player in franchise history is now on the late side of 30. So this is a very big offseason, no matter if it's the biggest or not. And to me, the biggest question of this big offseason is, what do the Nuggets do in their front office in replacing Calvin Booth, who really was replacing Tim Conley?
And it sounds like they might hire a head coach potentially before they go through that path with the executive. But I agree with you. I think the executive is the most important because you and I touched on this after the Game 7 loss and I forget who threw out this take, so it's not my original thought, but I thought it was a smart one that, like the NFL, like the NFL has become such a front office dominant league, right? Like you hear about the Eagles, you hear about all these different teams, the Broncos, all that kind of stuff, about how these executives make these super savvy moves and trades that ultimately get these teams in position to win NFL championships and Super Bowls and whatnot. And it feels like Denver's identity was riding the coattails of what Tim Conley had built. Obviously, that got them an NBA championship, but now two shortcomings in a row in consecutive seasons for the Denver Nuggets. So I agree with you. I think the executive, the head coach, and then the trickle-down effect to the roster as a whole. And I agree with Zach. I do think this is the biggest offseason in Nuggets franchise history just because of where you're at. With Nikola Jokic at his apex, playing peak-level basketball, Jamal Murray, new contract extension, what happens with Michael Porter Jr., the decisions made this offseason could be the difference between 2, maybe 3 more championships or no more championships at all.
I think everyone's kind of in the ballpark right now with the Thunder that if they're not going to win it this year, at least they're set up for...
Yeah, they ain't going nowhere.
Right.
And let me tell you this, Wembanyama's coming. There's a lot of talent in the Western Conference. I mean, it's only going to get more and more difficult.
But just specifically on the Thunder, a lot of people credit Sam Presti, their general manager, who was their general manager with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, right? Okay, so the two trades that I've talked about time and time again that really just screwed the Nuggets were moving up into the first round to get Peyton Watson, who was unproven, and you use a roster spot on him and you don't use him during a championship season. It worked out okay, and Peyton's turned out to be a player and an asset for the Nuggets that might be valuable moving forward. But then the next year you double down on it, and you do the exact same type of trade, and you move up to get Julian Strawther, Hunter Tyson, and Jalen Pickett in that draft. 2 of those 3 guys have not hit, and that's not surprising. The hit rate on late first-round picks and second-round picks is not that high.
Not great.
But you wasted future draft capital in order to make those moves. AP, do you remember who those 2 trades were with?
Honestly, no.
So 2027 and 2029 first-round picks the Nuggets sent out in those trades. Both those trades both those draft picks are owned by Sam Presti and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Sam Presti, the Oklahoma City Thunder top executive, was on the NBA's negotiating board for this new collective bargaining agreement. He was ahead and knew what was likely to be in the first and second apron, this new second apron that was designated, which is seemingly hamstringing the Nuggets and was the main reason why they didn't bring KCP back. The Thunder, who a lot of people have said are best prepared for this world of the second apron, were ahead of the curve because of their general manager, who is very respected in the NBA, runs in those league circles, was prepared, made the moves he needed to make while building his roster, and now his roster reflects this era of NBA basketball where he is going to need to replace a lot of players around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander because it's going to be hard to afford the second, third, and fourth banana like the Nuggets are kind of boxed in because they're paying those guys.
Well, and what's that metric or that note that I've seen thrown out? No repeat champions in the NBA now guaranteed for 7 consecutive seasons.
The last 7 champs are all different 7 champs. We know that for sure, which is the first time that's ever happened in NBA history. The league wanted parity. This is parity.
Yeah, they're getting it. And I think, to your point about Sam Presti, another guy that gets talked about, pretty highly, although it hasn't resulted in anything, is Danny Ainge with the Utah Jazz. Stockpiling draft picks, the future's bright when they figure it all out. And so the Nuggets, there's no other way to slice it. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, obviously, you're in a good position, having Nikola Jokic being 1 game away from a Western Conference final, having Jamal Murray, despite some up and down performances, but it's not like Denver is in the Milwaukee Bucks situation which is the big question of like, how do they not become Milwaukee?
But the Nuggets can easily end up in the Milwaukee Bucks situation if the front office listens to the people on our radio station. People on a radio station, stop doing that.
Yeah, but like I think that's the thing is they're on that trajectory. And again, to bring it back to most important offseason in Nuggets franchise history, because if it doesn't go the right way, then they will become the Milwaukee Bucks. And Nikola Jokic is too good to only have one championship in his NBA career. So point being, big front office, head coach, roster, and for whatever reason, I think we'll get the head coach figured out before the executives, which I think not necessarily is a mistake. I just like to follow the order of operations, right?
Yeah.
PEMDAS back in the day in school, parentheses, this, that, the other. I'd like to see Denver go a little bit more traditional in that route, but we shall see.
Okay, on the order of operation, one of the reasons why Michael Malone is no longer the head coach of the Denver Nuggets is because he did not respect that order of operation. He and Calvin Booth got into plenty of arguments, right? We know about their tiffs. It's very public, and I have written about it for denversports.com. And the whole thought is, okay, even if Michael Malone was right about everything, you can't bring him back because you want the new GM to have a fresh slate and not for Michael Malone to feel like he's got a bigger voice than the GM. So you roll it into this offseason, and if you hire David Adelman before you hire your GM, you kind of end up in the exact same place where your head coach has an outsized voice compared to your general manager. So the number one reason for firing Michael Malone with 3 games left in the regular season, it might be nullified by the first move of your offseason. And that to me is just absurdity. Second thing here on what you just said. Do you believe the Denver Nuggets front office opening is an attractive opening because they have very limited assets? The core is already in place. There isn't much for an executive to do. So there isn't much for them to do in order for this team to win a championship, but there also isn't much for them to do in terms of putting their own fingerprints on the roster. So is this an attractive opening?
Yeah, I think it's a very attractive opening. I mean, the opportunity to, run the show, having the best player in the world in his prime, in and of itself, even if it was a bunch of, rocks next to Nikola Jokic, it would be an attractive opening. And I think here's the other thing. You know this as well as I do. The high-level NBA executive and just sports executives in general, NHL, NFL, MLB, very egotistical people. Very, very egotistical. And I know that there's probably a few guys out there that look at the Nugget situation and say, you know what, I could do this, I could do that. Let me show you how. Question is, do Stan and Josh Kroenke want to open up the piggy bank there a little bit to pay for that? But I don't think, let's use Bob Myers as the example because he's the most public name out there.
He's the hot commodity. Everyone's talking about him, and he's won a lot of championships.
Yeah, I don't think Bob Myers is sitting back and looking at the Nuggets roster, lack of draft capital and this and that, and looking for a reason as to not take the job if it were offered to him. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect to Bob Myers that believes, hey, I did it with Steph Curry and building that roster after it had already been assembled. He didn't draft Steph Curry. He didn't draft Klay Thompson. He inherited it. He put the final touches on it. But granted, he had a lot of other maneuvers to make and an ability to do it. But he's also the guy who started the 2 timelines thing in Golden State, which has turned out to be an utter disaster.
Well, I was going to say maybe he's learned from his mistakes. Having been in that situation with Golden State with a prime Steph Curry, still got Draymond, got Klay, and then trying to, do this dual timeline thing, as you alluded to, maybe he's learned from that and can apply that if he were to be the Denver Nuggets executive. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. There's nothing concrete that I've read or heard or talked to anybody about that is directly linking Bob Myers to the Denver Nuggets outside of the fact that we think he would like the opportunity if it was presented to him.
The job is open and he's a hot name. That's the link. Yeah.
But no, it's going to be interesting, man, because, we're one non-fourth quarter blown lead away from being in the Western Conference Final if you're the Nuggets. So it's not like they're that far off. Again,
and they're one executive hired or one executive that walked out the door away from not facing that team twice in the Western Conference in the Western Conference playoffs.
Yep.
Because of the moves that were made by that guy who, if it didn't go well last year, I don't know that it was going to go this year after 2 7-game series. Granted, that might have been 6 if they didn't blow the lead. So, it just underscores how important the executive position is because Tim Connelly did the thing no one in the NBA wanted to do, which was trade for Rudy Gobert, and it worked out in spades. And then he did the hardest thing, which is trade your former number 1 overall pick and a guy that everyone in that franchise loved in Karl Anthony Towns. And both moves have actually worked out really well and supporting Anthony Edwards and this young star. I'm not saying Tim's perfect. I had a lot of problems with Tim and the way he kind of didn't get 3-and-D players that were so obviously needed for the Nuggets. But now we're 2 years, 3 years removed from Tim. And there's one player who can do 3-and-D on the roster, and it's Aaron Gordon. And I don't know how long that's going to last for. So it's a really tough spot for the Nuggets to be in. I ultimately think that this is not that attractive of a job for a GM because I don't know what they can make. And to me, that's almost a positive sign for the Nuggets, because if you think that this is an attractive job as a GM, that means you believe you're probably trading Christian Brown and Michael Porter Jr. and trying to get a big name player back here, and you're taking credit for it. And to me, that's how you end up in the situation the Milwaukee Bucks got into. You trade all your assets, you get a guy like Damian Lillard, it doesn't work out, and where do you go from there? There's nowhere to go. The Nuggets are still good. The Milwaukee Bucks aren't. There's no reason for the Nuggets to panic. They just took the best team I've seen in a decade in the NBA regular season to 7 in the second round with no coach. They just did that. They won 57 games the year before, and they won the title the year before that. To me, the problem is the Nuggets had the best thing in the NBA, which was Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray's two-man game. Now the best thing in the NBA is the Oklahoma City Thunder's defense. Mm-hmm. So if I'm the new GM of the Denver Nuggets, I'm doing everything I can possible to support the two-man game of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, and that's my big agenda. And to me, that doesn't scream attractive to a front office candidate. That screams to me like Ben Tenzer or Tommy. Tommy's going to be the GM of the Nuggets, which, that's not going to be sexy and people are going to be upset about it. And there is a certain aspect of cheaping out. And certainly those guys have made their own mistakes and running the Nuggets front office. But it might actually not be the worst move in this situation.
No, I think publicly it would not be, highly favored. I think a lot of Nuggets fans would be confused, upset, because of the lack of stopping power, the lack of brand power that comes with promoting from within. But I think here's the other thing. And I'm not trying to give owners a pat on the back, for free or anything like that. But like, if Josh Kroenke in his heart of hearts believes that Tommy and Ben Tenzer and, maybe David Adelman, his head coach, if he truly believes that is the best option for the Denver Nuggets, all things considered, then you got to go with that.
Well, let me cut you off for a second, because why are the Nuggets in the spot they're at? Like, who's responsible ultimately for the reason why the Nuggets are here?
I think it's a combination of Calvin Booth and Josh Kroenke himself.
Yeah, and Michael Malone too, I think, deserves some blame. But it's, to me,
I just think Malone was dealt a bad hand, but continue.
I agree. I think Malone was dealt a bad hand and played it poorly.
Yes.
But the bad hand came because of Josh and Calvin. But my point to you is, Josh is the guy responsible for the problems the Nuggets are facing right now. It's Josh who let Tim walk. It's Josh who gave Calvin the position. It's Josh that let Calvin and Michael's relationship get that bad. And if you don't believe me, who wrote it for Denver Sports Monday morning, you should go read that column. Hear it from Josh. Because Josh was the one who said, let me fall on the sword, this is my fault, when he had that press conference right at the end of the season about all the changes. So Josh Kroenke knows he messed up. He admitted it. I actually give Josh credit for being so open about the mistakes he's made. Josh loves the Nuggets. Josh has important things going on elsewhere, but Josh is a Nuggets fan. Like, legitimately, the owner of the Nuggets is a Nuggets fan.
Yes.
I think Josh is going to do what it takes in his mind to fix the issues. So whatever decision that is made with this front office opening, whether that's they swing big and get a guy like Bob Myers or they keep it internal with Ben Tenzer, I actually don't think it's going to be the decision that's made out of cheapening out or whatever, because they have made the cheap decision in the past. I think in his heart of hearts, Josh Kroenke is going to do the thing that he believes is the right decision for this circumstance.
Oh, I completely agree. I have confidence in Josh Kroenke to, go with his gut, for lack of a better phrase, and not just cheap out for the sake of cheaping out. And you also have to think about it from this perspective. This is the best the Denver Nuggets will likely ever be. Like, in Josh Kroenke's lifetime. I mean, I don't know where we're going to be 70 years from now.
They're never getting a player as good as this
Exactly.
again.
So, like, if there's ever a time to push the chips all in and make that type of move, now is the time to do it. But my question, I'll throw it back to you. Do you trust Josh Kroenke running the show despite how Malone and Booth kind of wore out their welcome? Because, look, they hit on Masai Ujiri a long time ago now. They were able to cheap out, but back to
they
the
also
Tim
hit
Conley.
on Kike Vandeweghe before that, too.
Exactly. So the
They've
history,
been good with executive hires.
The history is good for Denver. So do you trust Josh to make the right call?
Yeah, because I think he learned from the Calvin situation, too.
What do you think he learned?
About organization cohesion between your top and your bottom.
Synergy.
Synergy. And that almost makes me feel a little bit better if you do, just thinking it out. if you do hire David Adelman before you hire an external GM, is they're going to be specifically looking for someone that will have a working relationship or maybe already does with David Adelman. So I think that's going to be such an important thing, is just the organizational synergy, and that's the number one thing that they learned from this past situation. But that kind of brings us back to David, which is such a big part of this. And you've kind of wavered on this. And, the last time I talked to you about this was right after Game 7. Do you believe that David Adelman earned this job?
I don't think he point blank earned it. And I think you used the word waiver, and I would agree with that. For me, it's about principles of you finished exactly where you finished last year. So it's not like David Adelman, took you to a new level. Now,
I think
that's
he
not
raised
fair to
the
him.
ceiling, though. But
I think he did.
Different teams.
But it's black and white. I'm still looking at it as second round exit Game 7. That's just how I'm looking at it. And I think it is unfair to a certain extent to fully judge David Adelman because he had 3 regular season games and then 14 playoff games to kind of earn his keep, for lack of a better
phrase. With a
phrase.
roster we all know sucks.
Exactly. That's why I wouldn't be upset if David Adelman does end up getting the job, because I do think he did a nice job, all things considered, with the circumstances for Denver in his limited sample size there. I just want to see Denver check their boxes and do their due diligence.
So you want to see a coaching search?
Yes, and I think that's the fair thing to assume. I don't think David Adelman did anything. I think he did a good job considering the circumstances, but I don't think he did anything in that vacuum that should guarantee him the job.
Okay. Can you undergo a coaching search and then go back to David? Or is that offensive or something? I don't know.
He's an assistant coach, an interim coach. It's not like, it's not like you're doing that to Michael Malone, whether you want to decide to keep him or not, and you're going to entertain other options in the offseason. I think ethically, I can understand how that's maybe a little weird. But I think David also knows that he's kind of been thrown into the fire. And when you're thrown into the fire, a lot comes with that.
So David's contract was up at the end of this season. That's one of the reasons why the Nuggets wanted to give him a look, because he was going to be a head coach probably this year. The Nuggets got their look. So I don't know that you need an interview process with David, because I think David just showed you and has shown you, because he's worked here for so long, what he can do.
100%. And I think who David Adelman is. I think through the 14 playoff games and the 3 regular season games, you kind of understand who he is, what he brings to the table, and how he would coach this team moving forward. I just fall back on, and I'm not sure there's a better option out there.
Do you think that the players aren't going to say negative things about him, but the players, especially Aaron Gordon and Christian Brown, went to bat for him in that locker room post Game 7? Does that sway you?
I think it says a lot, 100%. And obviously, I feel like the NBA compared to the other sports is the most player driven. You want your players happier or happiest in the NBA, I guess you should say, versus the NFL. Bill Belichick just didn't care.
Did you catch that moment, by the way, with Nikola Jokic, because we asked him about David Adelman, whether or not he should come back, and he was like, David did a great job, and then what do you want, Nikola, was the question, and he giggled and he said, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing, because he knows it's not.
Shot.
He knows it's not.
Yeah.
So Nikola can make this decision. He's not going to.
Yeah, no, 100%. And
the other thing is, when we do coaching hires, just generally in sports, it's always the opposite of what was there before. That's 95% of the hires. I do think David marks that box. I mean, it's funny because he's a Nepo coach, and he has a lot of similarities to Malone, but in the same sense, he's not a New York guy. He's an Oregon guy. He's a little more relaxed. I think he's more friendly to the players, allows that dialogue. And it'd be interesting to see how it plays out over the course of the season. But I think David completely won this job in my mind. I think it's going to be really hard for them to go to someone else and explain that to the locker room. Now, if that other coach is Jeff Van Gundy, who has that cachet and knowledge with the NBA, yeah, I think you can get away with that with the players in the locker room because of the level of respect. I just don't think you can go out and hire Taylor Jenkins and say, oh, we've improved this situation. No. I think David Adelman just won more playoff games than Taylor Jenkins did his entire time in Memphis.
Yeah, no, and let me throw out 3 names, one of them which is Adelman, but all 3 are connected to Denver in one way or the other in recent memory as well. Where would you, if these were your 3 options, Adelman, Mike Inori in Minnesota, who I think would accept the job if he was offered it, and another guy who's currently an NBA head coach that I think would really consider accepting the job if he was offered it, Jordy Fernandez.
Oh, I love Jordy.
Because that's the thing, they're all from the same ethos, right? And I think you're talking about players being happy and seals of approval, this and that. I think all 3 of those guys would make that Nuggets locker room excited.
David, I would say, would be a really good hire.
You put him above the other two?
David, I say, would be a really good hire. I don't know what the argument would be for hiring Mike Inori over David at this point, because David just had the playoff experience. And to me, that was the number one thing that you could make the case against David was he just hasn't been in these spots. He's a young rookie coach, but he just was in those spots. And the most stressful version of it against the toughest out, like he was put in the worst spot possible.
What was the best thing about David Adelman in the playoffs? What was what sways your opinion? Not saying that you're completely sold on Adelman, but what did he do in the playoffs outside of gaining experience that makes it be like, okay, like this could be the guy?
The zone defense. He said to heck with it and just did the most extreme defense I've seen the Denver Nuggets play at any point. And he said, I don't care what people think about this. I'm going to go do it. And it's the only reason the Nuggets took the Thunder to 7. On top of that, I thought their offense in general, granted there was a lot of turnovers, a lot of turnovers, especially against the Thunder, but I don't think they get through that Clippers series without David being as creative on the draws as he was. I thought his after timeouts were really good. I thought his creativity in adjustments for the offense worked very well in tandem with Nikola Jokic, whereas at the end of the Jokic-Malone era, it kind of felt like some of that was stale and just falling onto Jokic to do everything. So I thought he was really good from a cohesion standpoint, working with the players, and then strategy-wise of the zone defense. So, there was some rotation questions, especially putting Murray and Jokic out of the game together to start the second quarter. But ultimately, I just don't know what you were supposed to do with the rotations. Like, you just didn't have a good answer. So I'm not as critical of the rotations as some might be. But my answer would be synergy with your players and your coaching staff that has proven to be a good coaching staff, and strategy in terms of zones and your after timeouts and putting players in good positions on offense. They won the Clippers series. Guys shot really good from 3 and were open. That's partially because the Clippers left them open. It's partially because David Adelman got them open. Yeah, no,
and I agree with your points. And here's the other thing. Like, you could have brought Phil Jackson out of retirement, and I'm not sure that they're getting further than they did with David Adelman. Like, I think that he was handicapped. Like, and Mike Inori, Jordy Fernandez, Pat Riley, insert name here, right? And I think that they would probably be in the same situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Right. Jordy Fernandez, to me, would be an absolute home run. I don't know that you're luring him away from Brooklyn, and this is funny to say about a coach who went 30 games under 500 in his 1 year in the NBA, whereas
also dealt a bad hand.
Yeah, very bad hand. Whereas David Adelman literally went undefeated in the regular season as a head coach, and that's the thing is it's really hard to make the argument for Jordy Fernandez, who's the exact same age as David Adelman, over David Adelman at this point because of the thing he just did in the playoffs. Going into the postseason, if the Nuggets flamed out in the first round, I think there was going to be a good argument for Mike Inori, David Adelman, Jordy Fernandez, put them all together. And Jordy Fernandez at least has coached elsewhere and been in another situation, but it would have been a very insular hire as well. The only reason it's not insular is because he's worked 1 year in Brooklyn. Besides that, He had been with the Nuggets for longer than David.
My thing is, and I'm not trying to tear David Adelman down. I'm really not. Like I said, and I'll say it again, I am fine if Denver goes that direction with David Adelman. I just don't know, like Aaron Gordon miracle dunk and miracle shot. Russell Westbrook hitting a corner 3, which we feel like never happened before. Like are these David Adelman things, or is this Denver just playing good basketball and getting lucky at the right time as well?
They weren't playing like that with Michael Malone.
This is true. And I think that speaks to the bigger conversation about just how bad it was with Michael Malone. I know you've had some conversations about that as well. And again, David Adelman, if that's the route they go, if Josh Kroenke feels in his gut, in his heart of hearts, that is the right guy, and he's got the Nikola Jokic seal of approval, which he will get if they do go that route, I'm okay with it. I just, again, bringing it back to kind of where we started this conversation, you have to get this right this offseason, because if not, we're going to look back at what could have been with this Denver Nuggets era.
So the 11 best available coaches, according to Basketball News, this was back in April. Number 1, Michael Malone. Number 2, Taylor Jenkins. Number 3, Mike Brown. Number 4, James Borrego, Albuquerque's own. Number 5, Frank Vogel. Number 6, Sam Cassell. Number 7, Royal Ivey. Number 8, Mike Inori. Number 9, Chris Quinn. Number 10, Steve Nash. Number 11, Mike Budenholzer. You mentioned Inori. Chris Quinn is my favorite assistant in the league. I think he'd be a great hire. But again, it's hard to make the argument for an assistant over David Adelman because they haven't been a head coach. Jordy's even falling into that bucket. So it's any of those names, experienced head coaches stick out to you. To me, I actually think Mike Budenholzer got a raw deal in Phoenix. I think he'd be a good coach. But to me, it makes no sense to hire him here when he's almost Michael Malone to a T, except worse.
Yeah, I mean, no names jump off that list, like, to be completely honest with me, outside of the one. Like, I think the internal ones that we've talked about, whether it's a Nori, a Fernandez, Adelman, like, I understand, like, there's this big dynamic of, like, you need to go get a coach with experience. I don't necessarily know if I subscribe to that thought. I think you want a coach that's going to build these players up, has some creativity, and has, a bag of tricks that he can tap into throughout the course of the game. And so, as we kind of move forward now through this NBA offseason for Denver, like, what are they going to prioritize? Like, are they going to prioritize a guy who's been there and done that? Because, like, the last thing I want is a Doc Rivers type. It's the last thing I want.
Oh, my God, it's my nightmare. And here's the thing, too. With your head coach that you hire, and this is about to be something you're going to bring up, I don't care what the regular season looks like next year.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm
looking at a 7-seed Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Final for the second year in a row.
Well, and what's funny about this is if the Nuggets had gotten through in Game 7, it would have guaranteed that a 4 or lower seed would be playing in the finals, and it would have been the third year in a row that had happened, and it hadn't happened except once going back to, like, the mid-Warriors run. So, like, 10 years it didn't happen where a team that didn't have home court in the first round didn't make made the finals, and then it's happened 3 years in a row now if the Timberwolves are able to get the job done. Or the Pacers, I guess, because they're the 4 seed as well. Point being, I think the Nuggets, like they almost did this year, except the panic at the end, should almost be targeting the 6 seed. It doesn't matter. I'm playing Aaron Gordon 65 games and no games more next year. I'm playing Jamal Murray 65 games. I'm playing Michael Porter Jr. 65 games. I am not letting these guys on the floor for another minute. I need them healthy. I know what the core looks like when it's rested going into the playoffs and healthy. It looks awesome. Just look at this year unhealthy. They were still plus 34 as the starting 5 in 192 minutes against this Thunder team. The last time they were rested and healthy going into the postseason, they won the championship. So I want them rested and healthy. I don't care what happens during the regular season. Obviously, you got to get to the playoffs. I'm not too worried about that. I think that Nikola Jokic playing 65 games is going to get you 50 wins in his 65 games. He can go 50 and 15. To me, the most important thing about the Nuggets regular season, their new coach needs to develop their defensive scheme. David Adelman's already started to do that. And number 2, that guy needs to spend 28 minutes a game utilizing Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther. He needs one of those 2 guys to cash, if not both, for the Nuggets to advance. They are not going to have these massive swings in the offseason with external guys coming in. Internal development is going to be so important. What happens with Deron Holmes is going to be so important. Maybe, and this is a crazy thing to say, Zeke Naji with a different guy holding the whistle will have more confidence and play different because he'll be put in the actual spot he should be playing in, which is power forward. I don't know. But to me, the number one thing the Nuggets need to do after not caring so much about the regular season, and I'm not saying they did this year, is utilizing that regular season to spend minutes on players they need to develop so their bench can look more like Kason Wallace, Alex Caruso, and Aaron Wiggins than it did this year, which is, Russ is a minus 34 in a Game 7 despite playing 20 minutes.
And I think you want a guy that's very confident in his beliefs and has the ability to make quick decisions. Because here's the thing. I agree with you about P. Watt, Strawther, all these guys, give him the run. But if we're here at Christmas time next year and we're still asking these questions, like, you need to give yourself an opportunity to pivot, whether it's the trade deadline, get some different guys in there. But
you also need the coach that gives these guys the confidence and the leash.
Yes.
Where they're able to make these mistakes.
2 months in the regular season's a fair runway.
I think it's a good amount. I would maybe hang it out for a little bit longer, maybe to the trade deadline itself. Because the reason why I think Christian Brown's the 4th most improved player in the league is he had the minutes and he had the leash to make mistakes.
No, 100%. And I think bringing it back, to the record dynamic, like when Denver won the championship, they went 53-29. Oklahoma City, 68 wins in the regular season this year. 2 similar teams in the sense of young teams on the rise that haven't proven it to the league yet, right? Denver has that luxury now of, hey, we've been there, we've done that with this core. I think you prioritize health. I think you prioritize mental well-being of this team. And again, I bring it back to Minnesota. This is, 2 years in a row. Well, I don't remember. Where did Minnesota finish last year?
Minnesota was
the 4?
The 4. No, because the Nuggets were the 2 seed. Minnesota was the 3, I want to say.
Okay. Well, maybe Control-Alt-Delete that.
I think it was Oklahoma City was 57, Denver was 57. I think Minnesota was 55 or 56.
And the point being on that is, like, and it's hard because I still remember, like, wanting to throw my TV out of my apartment when they lost to the Wizards twice this year. Like, those games are going to happen with this type of thought. But the big thing
But
for
I'm
Denver,
okay. But, like, the Wizards game happening when you're starting 5 out there kills me. The Wizards game happening when maybe it's just Jamal, Julian, and Peyton. I'm like, all right, I get that.
Yeah,
and you know what? They won one of those games this year against Golden State when it was nobody. And at the same time, that same week, they lost one of those games to the Spurs because that stuff happens when you're trying those things, and that's okay. It's not okay for it to happen when your starting 5 is all together.
100%. And you know, you brought it up, 65 games. That's the number of games that you want of high-quality basketball from Nikola, Jamal, Aaron Gordon, what happens with Michael Porter Jr. The goal for Denver this coming season should be avoid the play-in at all costs and be as healthy as you could possibly be come playoff time. Because home court advantage is going like this.
So the last 2 playoff series, or not last 2 playoff series, but the last 2 playoff series in which they've lost, Minnesota, they lost 3 of the 4
home court
home
advantage
games.
in both.
They lost 3 of the 4 home games, right? In that series against Minnesota last year. This year against the Thunder, they lost 2 of the 3 home games. Why do you need home court? It just
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
And I misspoke. Obviously, they didn't have a home court against Oklahoma City. They earned it.
They earned it
when they won game 1 and they blew it again.
Yeah.
So again, I got
and you lost a home game to the Clippers too.
Yeah, I got to prioritize
yeah.
health. Like that has got to be the number one thing because here's the thing: if Michael Porter Jr. is 100% healthy and Aaron Gordon doesn't have the
well, and
hamstring flare-up,
Porter's was a freak injury, but Gordon's came because he was taxed.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's I don't know, man. Like it's so interesting, and obviously, like the emotions and feelings about this season are still very raw, and you know, there's a lot of moving that needs to happen, things that need to happen come this offseason. But I do think the one optimistic point of view, if you're a Nugget fan, is they're not very far off. I use this analogy all the time with you. They're in the red zone, punch it in the end zone. Like that's where you're at right now. Couple bad plays, couple bad moves here or there. You're going to find yourself on the outside looking in, but we're not there yet.
Nuggets pick up like one veteran in free agency. They run it back with the core, and David Adelman's their coach. I think that team probably at least gets the 6th seed in the West.
I think they could have a similar record as they had this year.
Probably has a similar record. And maybe you just hope at that point Julian and Peyton look a little bit different.
I think they could have the same record or within the same record as this year without a coach. Like, I really believe that.
Coach Yoke?
Like, because of that dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far because...
Obviously, that's an extreme. But, like, point being, like, the coach doesn't move them... Like, it doesn't, like... hiring the right coach doesn't automatically make them a favorite to win the NBA Finals.
You know my coaching theory, right? I've explained this on the Mile High Hoops podcast a bunch. There's 2 types of coaches in the league. There's ones that raise the floor, and there's ones that raise the ceiling. And there's only a handful of guys that do both. To me, that's Ime Udoka, it's Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, who no longer is coaching, and Eric Spoelstra. Tom Thibodeau raises your floor. That's a floor raiser.
Michael
Malone raises your floor. I'm trying to think of a ceiling raiser, but Kenny Atkinson is a ceiling raiser.
Yeah, Kenny Atkinson.
I don't know what David Adelman is yet. I think he's a ceiling raiser, and I think the Nuggets need a ceiling raiser because we know what the floor is with Nikola Jokic. He's willing to try extreme things, and that makes me think he's a ceiling raiser.
I don't hate that take whatsoever. And I that's, again, going back to the luxury of having Nikola Jokic. He's going to be, 31 next year. So you look at it this year, if you got probably 3, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I'm saying this, like 3, maybe 4 prime apex Jokic seasons left.
You have
if he wants to play that long?
You probably have 2, honestly.
2.
Yeah.
Think about that.
You have 2 more MVP years left, and you probably have 3 more All-Star years after it. And then you have, a couple more years of him being great. So
when you talk about it like that, Calvin Booth doesn't seem so crazy.
What do you mean?
With this Spurs method of draft, develop, and
let's just find Kawhi Leonard.
Hard to do.
Let's just find Kawhi Leonard in the mid-first round, and then all of a sudden we can hand the franchise from Jokic to Leonard, like Duncan to Leonard. Like, come on, it's not happening.
I know. It's living on a prayer, but I understand. I feel bad because like Calvin is someone. He was good to me in the interactions that I had. Like, I liked Calvin Booth as a person. I just thought as an executive, every decision went the wrong way for him.
I don't. I think he nailed the big stuff. And I said this.
What? KCP?
Never in Denver Nuggets history would a player like Jamal Murray re-sign with them before this era. And he got that extension done. And people will get mad because they say Jamal's overpaid or yada, yada, yada. Jamal's the 5th most important Nugget in Denver Nuggets history.
Yeah, but
and
the
he's
CBA also makes it so that these players are dumb if they don't take these deals.
Sure.
Like you're literally losing out on tens of millions of dollars if you sign.
He got
elsewhere.
Aaron Gordon to take a discount at the start of his contract.
He did. But I think that's more about Aaron Gordon, the person.
Sure, but
I think Gordon just loves
either
where
way,
he's at.
all the big stuff that needed to get done under Calvin Booth's tenure got done.
I would say the maintenance stuff. What did he do to actually make the team better?
Well, and that's the problem, is he kept the baseline. He didn't.
Which isn't the worst thing
I mean,
in the world.
The big move. The answer is Christian Brown.
Right.
The answer is Christian Brown.
You could be the Phoenix Suns right now if it went the other way.
Right.
So, it's not again, they're not in a bad spot. It's over and done with. Calvin Booth is gone. Michael Malone's gone. Onward and upward. Got to make the right decision.
All right. Well, it's the biggest question of the offseason. It might get answered in the next 48 hours of who the Nuggets hire.
Let us know in the comments. Who do you want?
Who do you want? Who do you want running this team besides Josh? Your president, maybe your GM if it's not the same person, and your head coach. I am interested to hear from you. We're going to do a lot of interactions with you in the future because there's no more content coming from the Nuggets except this week, hopefully.
We'll make the content.
Yeah. We're going to hear from hopefully whoever they hire as a head coach, which is probably going to be David Adelman this week. So we're going to hear from him very soon. We're going to hear from Josh at the very least if they don't make that decision. So we'll talk to you again on Thursday, so long as the press conference isn't at the exact time we record.
It will be knowing how this business works, but
we'll adjust. We'll figure it out. But we appreciate all the watches and listens here on the Mile High Hoops podcast. He's Aniello Piro. I'm Jake Shapiro, and we will talk to you again very, very soon.